coming to you from a place of literally zero authority. Coming to you as someone who has not read much Walt Whitman, I want to read some Walt Whitman poetry. I never really connected with Walt Whitman, and so I just sort of want to revisit and reevaluate. So, of course, Walt Whitman was very prolific, and he means different things to different people. Perhaps his most famous poem is My Captain, My Captain. Let's look at that now. Walt. So, one of Whitman's most famous poems of all time, written on the death of Abraham Lincoln. O Captain, my Captain. O Captain, my Captain, our fearful trip is done. The ship has weathered every wreck. The prize we sought is won. The port is near, the bells I hear, the people all exulting. While follow eyes the steady keel, the vessel grim and daring. But, O heart, heart, oh, the bleeding drops of red, where on the deck my captain lies, fallen, cold and dead. Okay, and this goes on for two more stanzas. So this is obviously very different from the kind of poetry that Walt Whitman wrote most of his life. Leaves of Grass was written before the Civil War, the first version of Leaves of Grass. So we see here Walt Whitman was born in 1819. He died in 1892. So Walt Whitman started writing in the years leading up to the Civil War, the American Civil War, which was fought from 1861 to 1865. And the first version of Leaves of Grass was written 1855, I think, was like when he first started publishing. So this is obviously after the Civil War, but it's stylistically very different from his earlier poetry. It is in rhyme, whereas Leaves of Grass is not. It's something that's sort of borders on prose. This sort of fits more of the stereotypical style of like a popular poem that people would kind of memorize. And so, I mean, this is nice. It's memorable. But this isn't really, I think, why people read Walt Whitman. I think Walt Whitman is considered to be great not because of this style of poetry, but more because of his Leaves of Grass, which is something much more free verse, no rhyme, sometimes seems to border on prose, and has a very unique tone and style. And so one of Whitman's earliest poems, and a poem which was published in the first edition of Leaves of Grass but was later removed, is called Respondez. So this is the Walt Whitman that I'm interested in. I'm interested in connecting to, or potentially not connecting to. I'm interested in evaluating. So according to Google Translate, Respondez is French for answer. Okay. Respondez, respondez, let everyone answer. Let those who sleep be waked. Let none evade. How much longer must we go on with our affectations and sneaking? Let me bring this to a close. I pronounce openly for a new distribution of roles. Let that which stood in front go behind, and let that which was behind advance to the front and speak. Let murderers, thieves, bigots, fools, unclean persons offer new propositions. Let the old propositions be postponed. So this is the quintessential Walt Whitman voice. It's this kind of manic voice. It's a voice that's calling pronouncements to the people. It's like this democratic voice. He's trying to speak to the people. And of course, he's doing this at a time of tremendous social conflict in the years leading up to the Civil War, where America is like totally divided, is violently divided on this issue of slavery, for example. Walt Whitman is coming from this place of disillusionment, I think. Disillusionment with politics. Disillusionment with the leaders. And I think he sees himself as trying to speak to the people, heal this divide. Of course, we know that this project is going to fail, right? Because the Civil War is going to come. But this broad tent democracy that he seems to reflect here, it's the anti-Henry David Thoreau, because Henry David Thoreau, also writing in the very same context, responded to this by a sort of distancing himself from people. He wrote Walden, where he went to live in the forest for, I don't know, I think a few years or something. I don't have to look it up. And he wrote in Walden, I've read some of it, not all of it. He wrote explicitly, it's great to just be away from people. He's responding to this tension, this turmoil in America, and he says, get me out of here. And Walt Whitman, in the same context, is this fatherly embrace. He's he sees himself as this poetic genius meta voice, speaking to people from this voice of wisdom. And so he wants to invert all the roles. Let contradictions prevail. Let one thing contradict another. And let one line of my poems contradict another. As I'm reading through this now, I see this sort of repetition. Let this, let that, let this, let that. And it's very long. I've got many lines like this. And one of Walt Whitman's characteristic techniques is this enumeration, this listing of stuff. And so he's listing all the things that he wants to see happen in society as he's speaking to the people. Let freedom prove no man's inalienable right. Everyone who can tyrannize, let him tyrannize to his satisfaction. This is such an interesting line. Walt Whitman is speaking from this voice of wisdom, but it's also a voice of anarchy. Let the eminence of meanness, treachery, sarcasm, hate, greed, indecency, impotence, lust be taken for granted above all. Let writers, judges, governments, households, religions, philosophies take such for granted above all. This is the message. The message is that human beings are all these things. Mean, treacherous, sarcastic, hateful. But we take it for granted. And we embrace it. And we work with it. And in a way, what comes across is this love. Walt Whitman is this voice of infinite love. Love for people, love for society. And that's his experiment. It's this experiment in radical, infinite love. Let the worst men beget children out of the worst women. Let the priests still play at immortality. Let death be inaugurated. Let nothing remain but ashes of teachers, artists, moralists, lawyers, and learned and polite persons. And so, as I'm rereading this, what's coming across now more than I think I've noticed in the past is really the audacity of Walt Whitman. It's a violent poem, but it's violent in an embracing and loving way. It's a very strange kind of experience. Let him who's without my poems be assassinated. Okay, this is again classic Walt Whitman because it's megalomaniacal. It's in a way. It's tyrannical in a way. Walt Whitman's voice is this voice of someone who assumes that he either is or needs to be accepted by the people, embraced by the people. He wants to embrace them and he wants them to embrace him. Another thread and theme that runs through Walt Whitman's poetry is a openness about sexuality and a sexual fluidity, a loving voice, often an eroticized loving voice, and it's a loving voice that encompasses men and encompasses women and plays with gender reversals. And we see this here. Let men among themselves talk and think obscenely of women, and let women among themselves talk and think obscenely of men. In the more puritanical context, in the religious antebellum context in which Walt Whitman is writing this is obviously a very incendiary, controversial thing to write. Let every man doubt every woman, and let every woman trick every man. Let us all, without missing one, be exposed in public. This is the Walt Whitman fantasy. We should all be naked, monthly, at the peril of our lives. Let our bodies be freely handled and examined by whoever chooses. This is the Walt Whitman image. Nakedness, love of the human body, love of the sex organs. And it sounds modern in a way to me. It's something that you expect out of modern poetry. But I think at the time he was writing, this was super groundbreaking. And it's a fact that he was censured under obscenity laws because of some of the things that he did write along these lines. Let nothing but copies be permitted to exist upon the earth. Let the earth desert God, nor let there never henceforth be mentioned the name of God. Let there be no God. This is audacious stuff. Let the slaves be masters. Let the masters become slaves. Let the reformers descend from the stands. Classic Walt Whitman. Let shadows be furnished with genitals. Let substances be deprived of their genitals. Let the she-harlots and the he-harlots be prudent. Mentioning he-harlots here, that's a audacious thing to do. I mean, of course, in antebellum society, there were she-harlots. That's well known, that's inevitable, that's in every society. But he-harlots, that's bold. More violence. Let the white person tread the black person under his heel. Say, which is trodden under heel after all? This embrace of even the cruelty that we know Walt Whitman despises and opposes. Let the reflections of the things of the world be studied in mirrors. Let the things themselves continue unstudied. Let a man seek pleasure everywhere except in himself. Let a woman seek happiness everywhere except in herself. Let the limited years of life do nothing for the limitless years of death. What do you suppose death will do then? That's the end of the poem. So it's sermonizing in a strange way. It's this voice of loving wisdom, audacious and heretical kind of wisdom. A voice of inversions, a voice of embracing absurdity. That is Respondez. I Sing the Body Electric, one of Walt Whitman's most famous poems. Also an early poem. This poem expresses Walt Whitman's just unbounded love, his love of the human body, his desire to embrace everything. I sing the body electric. In the late 19th century, electricity had some very profound connotations. It still does today. But it was more associated with metaphysics. I sing the body electric. The army of those I love engirth me, and I engirth them. They will not let me off till I go with them, respond to them, and discorrupt them, and charge them full with the charge of the soul. Was it doubted that those who corrupt their own bodies conceal themselves, and if those who defile the living are as bad as they who defile the dead? Okay, so this opening is pretty strange. But we sort of get the point here already. I mean, it's about love. Section 2, the love of the body of man or woman box account. The body itself box account. That of the male is perfect, and that of the female is perfect. So again, we have this sort of like ode to the divine nature of the human form. And we get Walt Whitman's great lists and enumerations. The expression of the face box account, but the expression of a well-made man appears not only in his face, it is in his limbs and his joints also. It is curiously in the joints of his hips and wrists, it is in his walk, the carriage of his neck, the flex of his waist and knees. And on and on and on. Long lists, long lists describing the body. Number 5 is a cool section. This is the female form, the divine nimbus exhales from it. From head to foot, it attracts with fierce, undeniable attraction. I am drawn by its breath as if I were no more than a helpless vapor. All falls aside but myself and it, books, art, religion, time, the visible and solid earth, and what was expected of heaven or feared of hell are now consumed. Mad filaments, ungovernable shoots play out of it, the response likewise ungovernable. Whitman is the poet of these ungovernable erotic impulses. The divine human form he's describing here. Hair, bosom, hips, bend of legs, negligent falling hands, all diffused, mind too diffused. Limitless, limpid jets of love, hot and enormous, quivering jelly of love, white blow and delirious juice. This is very erotic kind of language. Then he says, again, we get these Walt Whitman pronouncements, these wisdom pronouncements. Be not ashamed, women. Your privileges encloses the rest and is the exit of the rest. You are the gates of the body and you are the gates of the soul. At the time, it was ambiguous. And for some time, I think it was ambiguous. But now it's very well accepted that Walt Whitman was gay. Which is interesting because at the time he was writing, that term didn't even exist. We know from Walt Whitman's private writings that he had love affairs with young men. And as far as we know, none with women. So number 6 is about the man's body. The man's body is sacred and the woman's body is sacred. Now, number 7 and number 8 are really interesting to me. I mean, we're getting, I guess, towards, maybe 2/3 through this poem already. I guess there's 9 parts here. Number 7 and number 8 are really interesting to me. A man's body at auction. In the context of this poem, we're just describing the body. We're describing the glory of the body. But this is a man's body at auction that we're about to describe. This is a slave in antebellum America being sold. For before the war, I often go to the slave mart and watch the sale. Walt Whitman watches the sale of slaves. I help the auctioneer. The sloven does not half know his business. Gentlemen, look on this wonder. Whatever the bids of the bidders, they cannot be high enough for it. This is such a bizarre experiment. This is such a strange scene. Walt Whitman is going to try to say how invaluable, how beyond measure the beauty of this slave is. But this seems also to be an experiment in objectification. So it's a complicated scene. It's a complicated message. For it, the globe lay preparing quintillions of years without one animal or plant. For it, meaning this body of the slave, the revolving cycles truly and steadily rolled. In this head, the all-baffling brain. In it and below it, the makings of heroes. Examine these limbs, red, black, or white. They are cunning in tendon and nerve. They shall be stripped that you may see them. So, as I'm reading this, what I imagine sort of going on is like an inversion, a kind of parody, a reductio ad absurdum of the auction scene. Because, of course, the auction scene is a very grotesque, dehumanizing, objectifying scene where you take a human being and you set a price, sell it to the highest bidder in a morally abhorrent context. And Whitman's like usurping the scene, and he becomes the auctioneer, but he's not so interested in selling as communicating the infinite value of this human species, this human specimen. Exquisite senses, life-lit eyes, pluck, volition. I assume that in antebellum America, just describing black bodies with these adjectives was a pretty unique kind of voice. Flakes of the breast muscle, pliant backbone and neck, flesh not flabby, good-sized arms and legs, and wonders within there yet. Within there runs blood, the same old blood, the same red running blood. There swells and jets a heart, there all passions, desires, reachings, aspirations. This is not only one man, this the father of those who shall be fathers in their turns. In him the start of populous states and rich republics. Of him countless immortal lives with countless embodiments and enjoyments. How do you know who shall come from the offspring of his offspring through the centuries? Who might you find you have come from yourself if you could trace back through the centuries? This is a powerful section for me. This is a powerful stanza. I mean, he is reversing a scene of cruelty, and he's using it as a platform to humanize and to notice the similarity and notice the humanity and the infinite humanity. It's impressive to me now that I'm rereading it. I'm liking it. Section 8, a woman's body at auction. So this is a prostitute, I think. And we're going to get a very similar play. So number 7 was the slave, and this is the prostitute. She, too, is not only herself. She is the teeming mother of mothers. She is the bearer of them that shall grow and be mates to the mothers. Have you ever loved the body of a woman? Have you ever loved the body of a man? Do you not see that these are exactly the same to all in all nations and times all over the earth? One of the things Whitman does is he's like the poet of empathy. He's the poet of inhabiting other people and imagining the experience and imagining the humanity of people. He continues, if anything is sacred, the human body is sacred, and the glory and sweet of a man is the token of manhood untainted. And in man or woman, a clean, strong, firm, fibered body is more beautiful than the most beautiful face. Section 9, we get a crazy long Whitman list, which we will not even touch. Lots of body parts get mentioned here. Probably, one might argue, to the point of tedium. Oh, I say, these are not the parts and poems of the body only, but of the soul. Oh, I say now, these are the soul. Very cool thing to say. Very bold ending here, that this list of body parts is the soul. Cool, so I like that. I like that a lot. Okay. So in I Sing the Body Electric, Walt Whitman addressed himself to the experience of a prostitute. Another early Whitman poem about a prostitute. Be composed. Be at ease with me. I am Walt Whitman. Liberal and lusty as nature. Not till the sun excludes you do I exclude you. Not till the sun excludes you do I exclude you. I love this. This is cool. This is exciting. We hear Walt Whitman introducing himself. He says he's liberal and lusty as nature, and he refuses to exclude her until the sun would exclude her. He is the poet of human dignity. He sees the human dignity in the common prostitute. He refuses to exclude her. Not till the waters refuse to glisten for you and the leaves to rustle for you do my words refuse to glisten and rustle for you. While Whitman is talking to everyone. He's talking to the common people and the neglected people and the downtrodden people. My girl, I appoint with you an appointment, and I charge you that you make preparation to be worthy to meet me. And I charge you that you be patient and perfect till I come. Till then, I salute you with a significant look, that you do not forget me. That is a strange ending. And I don't know what to make of it. Nothing to say about this ending, other than I consider it strange. I think we would be remiss if we didn't take a look at Song of Myself. It's been a long time since I looked at this poem. How long is it? It is long. Yes, it is long, long, long. Super long. Yeah, I don't think I've ever read this from beginning to end. That is the truth. I think I've read excerpts. I think I've dipped in here and there. So there might be gems in here that I do not know about. I'll have to read it. But let's see. I've read parts of it. 1. I celebrate myself and sing myself, and what I assume, you shall assume, for every atom belonging to me as good belongs to you. There's this poetic I, this Whitman I. I celebrate myself. What I assume, you shall assume. There's this dialogue, and it's kind of tyrannical. It's controlling. I loaf and invite my soul. I lean and loaf at my ease, observing a spear of summer grass. A spear of summer grass. My tongue, every atom of my blood, formed from this soil, this air, born here of parents, born here from parents the same, and their parents the same. I, now 37 years old, in perfect health begin, hoping to cease not till death. Creeds and schools in abeyance. Retiring back a while sufficed at what they are, but never forgotten. I harbor for good or bad. I permit to speak at every hazard. Nature without check, with original energy. A child said, "What is the grass?" fetching it to me with full hands. How could I answer the child? I do not know what it is any more than he. I guess it must be the flag of my disposition, out of hopeful green stuff woven. Or I guess it is the handkerchief of the Lord, a scented gift and remembrancer designedly dropped, bearing the owner's name some way in the corners, that we may see and remark, and say whose? Or I guess the grass is itself a child, the produced babe of the vegetation. Or I guess it is a uniform hieroglyphic, and it means sprouting alike in broad zones and narrow zones, growing among black folks as among white folks. Canuck, Tuckahoe, Congressman, Cuff, I give them the same, I receive them the same. And now it seems to me the beautiful uncut hair of graves. Whitman's doing this kaleidoscopic vision of all these associations he gets from the grass. Of course, his book is called Leaves of Grass. It represents God, represents a connection to the spiritual, and it represents this extreme democracy, that Whitman is obsessed with. It's the same grass for everyone. It grows here in one state as in another, for one person growing among black folks as among white folks. universal humanity, the universal connection to nature that we all share, no matter what your rank in life is. Continuing, tenderly will I use you, curling grass. It may be you transpire from the breasts of young men. It may be if I had known them, I would have loved them. It may be you are from old people or from offspring taken soon out of their mother's laps, and here you are the mother's laps. As he mentioned earlier, Whitman sees the human body as being connected to nature, of course, through the recycling of materials and atoms and molecules. And so he sees this recycled humanity in the grass. The smallest sprout shows there is really no death, and if ever there was, it led forward life and does not wait at the end to arrest it, and ceased the moment life appeared. All goes onward and outward, nothing collapses, and to die is different from what anyone supposed, and luckier. Has anyone supposed it lucky to be born? I hasten to inform him or her it is just as lucky to die, and I know it. We get this exciting series of images here. The little one sleeps in his cradle. I lift the gauze and look a long time and silently brush away flies with my hand. The youngster and the red-faced girl turn aside. Up the bushy hill, I peeringly view them from the top. The suicide sprawls on the bloody floor of the bedroom. I witness the corpse with its dabbled hair. I note where the pistol has fallen. The blab of the pave, tires of carts, slough of boot soles, talk of the promenaders, the heavy omnibus, the driver with his interrogating thumb, the clank of the shod horses on the granite floor. These are the scenes, this is the world, this is the America that Whitman is embracing, that he sees himself the poet of these scenes, the painter of these scenes, of this America. And so what do I think of all this? I see him now as like this rebellious, cocky character. This like over-the-top lover of people, lover of the world, of America. He has like an exuberance to him. His images reflect a darkness. As I'm saying this, my eyes came across this line. The runaway slave came to my house and stopped outside. I heard his motions crackling the twigs of the woodpile. Through the swung half door of the kitchen I saw him limpsy and weak, and went where he sat on a log and led him in and assured him, and brought him water and filled a tub for his sweated body and bruised feet, and gave him a room that entered from my own, and gave him some coarse clean clothes. I like that. Coarse clean clothes. And remember perfectly well his revolving eyes and his awkwardness, and remember putting plasters on the galls of his neck and ankles. He stayed with me a week before he was recuperated and passed north. I had him sit next to me at table. My firelock leaned in the corner. Whitman is the poet of universal humanity, of universal human dignity, an anti-slavery poet. In his personal life, we know that Whitman was associated with this very early, new, burgeoning Bohemia movement, which is kind of this like itinerant collective of artists who were like borderline vagabonds. And so he's like this crazy, grandiose, spiritual guy. And I sort of see him as having engaged in this experiment, this like radical love experiment, this like trying to heal the divide. And it didn't work. he couldn't transform America, it seems, through his poetry. He was recognized as a genius more so in retrospect, more towards the end of his life. When I think about Walt Whitman, I can't help but thinking about another poet, much more recent, and I see a kind of affinity between these two poets, and that is Allen Ginsberg. Allen Ginsberg was associated with a collection of artists and writers that lived a very similar kind of lifestyle to the early Bohemia movement in America, that is namely the Beat Generation. Allen Ginsberg wrote poetry in the 60s and 70s. His work was also animated by a violent and brutal struggle going on for civil rights for Black Americans. He was also gay, and he wrote very sexually explicit poetry. He was also censured under obscenity laws, just like Walt Whitman. He also wrote this audacious free verse that broke poetic conventions, that was sort of like just shouted. Whitman and Allen Ginsberg had this quality of, it sounds like they're shouting at you. They have this exuberance. They love parentheses. They love exclamation points and question marks. And it's like wild and kaleidoscopic. But each in their own time, it was like a lightning bolt of wildness and exuberance in the form of poetry. Howl. I saw the best minds of my generation destroyed by madness, starving, hysterical, naked. Who did this? Who did that? It's this long poem in like a Whitman style. Listing this. They did this. They did this. Who this? Who this? Who that? Very Whitman-esque. Both are very American and capture something about this American ethos, this American individuality and audacity and wildness. And so I want to end just by revisiting a poem that I like by Allen Ginsberg. I don't love everything Allen Ginsberg wrote, but certainly my two favorite poems are Howl and A Supermarket in California, which is nice and short and has this wonderful opening. What thoughts I have of you tonight, Walt Whitman. For I walked down the side streets under the trees with a headache, self-conscious, looking at the full moon. There's no question in my mind that Allen Ginsberg felt a connection to Walt Whitman. And we have an image here of a sort of homeless Allen Ginsberg, an itinerant, vagrant, vagabondish character, Allen Ginsberg, walking the side streets, looking at the full moon, thinking of Walt Whitman. Another character who, in his own time, in a very different kind of America, probably did a similar walk. In my hungry fatigue and shopping for images, I went into the neon fruit supermarket, dreaming of your enumerations. Allen Ginsberg's poetry is characterized by these like totally nonsensical juxtapositions, which on the level of words and definitions doesn't seem to make much sense, but our mind processes them and creates sort of a compelling. I find them compelling and exciting in an interestingly poetic way. In my hungry fatigue and shopping for images, I went into the neon fruit supermarket, dreaming of your enumerations. Of course, these are the Walt Whitman enumerations, which are so characteristic of his poetry. What peaches, what penumbras. I see this almost as like a parody of Walt Whitman. If Walt Whitman was here, what would he say? It's the Walt Whitman exclamation point, listing what he sees. Peaches and penumbras. You have the alliteration, but of course the penumbras is like so absurd. The outlines of shadows. Whole families shopping at night! Exclamation point. Aisles full of husbands, wives in the avocados, babies in the tomatoes. And you, Garcia Lorca, what are you doing down by the watermelons? He's being like silly almost. Allen Ginsberg is like joking, it seems, but it's like he's channeling this absurd Walt Whitman. I saw you, Walt Whitman, childless, lonely old grubber, poking among the meats in the refrigerator and eyeing the grocery boys. It's this vision of like disheveled, homeless Walt Whitman, eyeing the grocery boys, horny Walt Whitman. I heard you asking questions of each. Who killed the pork chops? What price bananas? Are you my angel? It's this like crazy, absurd Walt Whitman vision. I wandered in and out of the brilliant stacks of cans following you, and followed in my imagination by the store detective. We strode down the open corridors together in our solitary fancy, tasting artichokes, possessing every frozen delicacy, and never passing the cashier. Where are we going, Walt Whitman? The doors close in an hour. Which way does your beard point tonight? Will we walk all night through solitary streets? The trees add shade to shade. Lights out in the houses. We'll both be lonely. Will we stroll dreaming of the lost America of love? Past blue automobiles and driveways, home to our silent cottage. What I hear in this line is the disillusionment, the lost America of love, the Walt Whitman experiment, which never really came to fruition, which never really had the transformative effect that Walt Whitman or we might have hoped. Ah, dear father, graybeard, lonely old courage teacher, what America did you have when Sharon quit poling his ferry and you got out on a smoking bank and stood watching the boat disappear on the black waters of Lethe? We'll end here.